I was raised in a multi-generational satanic family.
Dark forces lie at the center of a secretive sect.
It's a religion of betrayal.
Carrying out unspeakable evils and exerting control over others.
For every survivor who's free, there are many thousands who are dead, who are still in the cult, who are insane.
What is the purpose of this dark group, and where are they hiding?
Sadly, it's all over the planet. Anywhere power is concentrated, you'll also find the Satanists anywhere in the world.
What little we know about this nefarious group comes from those who say they escaped the satanic cult. Satanic cults and dark magic sound like the stuff of fiction, but over the years many have come forward claiming to be the survivors of satanic ritual abuse. I recently spoke with one of these people. The words he shared paint an ominous picture of a hidden world that I hope I never encounter.
I was raised in a multi-generational satanic family from birth to about 16, 17. I don't know if you know about such families, but they tend to involve a lot of violence, physical violence, sexual violence, extortion, blackmail, trafficking, very dark black magic rituals. So I was in very traumatic circumstances from basically birth.
You said you were raised in it, multi-generational, so this was kind of your family that you were brought up in.
It was.
And what was involved in, and how did you break away from that?
Well, there are many layers to it. A lot of the spiritual work that I survived began before I was born, so while you're in the womb, they start doing black magic rituals on you. There were a lot of rituals which were supposed to infuse me with the spirit of various demons and drive me to an extremely demented place internally and externally. They were basically raising me to be a killer and a torturer of other people. They wanted me to be someone who would bring other people into the fold, and that usually does not happen consensually. It usually happens through blackmail and torture. So they wanted to raise me into a young adult who would be torturing other people as I had been tortured.
What is the purpose for them to want to have people do these things?
The basic answer is that they're seeking power, personal power, and they seek their own empowerment at the expense of the collective, at the expense of humanity, at the expense of their own friends and family. So it's a religion of betrayal. And with betrayal comes a certain high. You get adrenalized and you get into a mode where you get very addicted to that adrenaline. You get addicted to being in these very activated, very triggered states. So it's primarily unconscious. But basically what they're looking for is power, and they're looking to stay high. They're looking to stay in this adrenalized state. So their conscious goals are pretty dim. It's really more like a junkie looking for their next hit.
My primary exposure to Satanism has been from depictions in popular culture and in modern religions like the Church of Satan, originally founded by Anton LaVey in the 1960s, or the Satanic Temple, a more recent group. As far as I'm aware, neither of these separate groups even believe in Satan. They just use this symbolism to promote individualism and individual liberties. In fact, the Satanic Temple's website says it encourages benevolence and empathy. This hardly sounds like what Alandra is describing. So now how would people be able to differentiate between what you're talking about and the Church of Satan that Anton LaVey founded? Because that's pretty much has nothing to do with Satan.
Yeah. Yeah, those who publicly identify as Satanists are basically agnostic. They're basically humanists. They read Voltaire. They're kind of about free will. Honestly, I think they're pretty harmless. And a lot of their advice is quite liberating, I think. So that's the public version of Satanism. It makes it sort of a little bit attractive, a little bit rebellious, cool, and fun. Real Satanism is not in any public church. It's something underground. A lot of their activities are illegal, so they have to stay secret. They also have a lot of political power, so they're movers and shakers behind a lot of different major institutions, governments, religions. Anywhere power is concentrated, you'll also find the Satanists anywhere in the world. What they promise their practitioners is power, and the path to power is power over others, the power to harm others usually. And that can get people into altered states of consciousness where they feel they can connect to the divine, and specifically to demons and to Satan.
I imagine these altered states of consciousness are often experienced during ceremonies and rituals.
The most common rituals usually involve a victim who's humiliated and often murdered in front of a group. So that's the most common sort of general thing I can share. The victim sometimes is a random person off the street. It's not very common, but it does happen. More commonly, they are in the circle already. And some people do this willingly. They sacrifice themselves because they believe they'll gain favor in the afterlife, like many religions believe. A general theme is public harm, a circle of onlookers who are dispassionate or very hostile witnesses, and in the center of the circle is somebody going through a nightmare. They do use symbols traditionally associated with witchcraft. They do use pentagrams. They do use inverted crosses. These common symbols that Christians talk about, a lot of it is inverted Christianity also. So they'll read Bible passages backwards. That's a common practice, or they'll speak backwards in general. They're very interested in tricks and reversals and deception. And so a lot of their rituals revolve around that, and they reverse or they distort mainstream religious iconography to suit their purposes.
So now, if during these rituals someone is being killed, being murdered, how do they get away with it? I mean, aren't people going to start to wonder, like, hey, what happened to Bill down the street, you know?
They believe they're above the law. And in many cases, unfortunately, they have their agents very high up in law enforcement, so they have some extra legal protection. A lot of the leadership of the New York City Police Department, specifically, I know firsthand, is very compromised and in the pocket of the Satanists. So the whole legal infrastructure, they have a lot of control over. It's very sad to say, but it's true. Also, a lot of them are insulated by wealth. So they're doing these things in locations that are very distant from the general public. They're doing them at compound retreats, at huge mansions, at spaces away from the cities where there aren't going to be any witnesses. So they have the opportunity to do everything in this private world insulated by wealth, so that's another way. In my case, I was taken to a compound in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes region, and so I have a general idea of where it is. I don't know exactly where it is, but I know generally. Unfortunately, when we're being transported to these places, a lot of the times we're sedated, we're blindfolded, we're unconscious, and this is intentional. You know, they don't want us remembering details. And so when survivors come out about these things, often they are quite vague about the details, unfortunately.
What Alandra described sounds like an absolute nightmare. If what he says is true, I wanted to know how he and others were able to escape this power-hungry cult to share these stories. And then how did you break free from this? You know, like if there were rituals to infuse you with the powers of certain demons, like how does one overcome that, assuming that these things are true?
There are many ways. A lot of us never get free. I want to say that. For every survivor who's free, and especially for every survivor who goes public, there are many thousands who are dead, who are still in the cult, who are insane, who have gone on other paths where they did not find themselves, they didn't find their freedom. So it's a pretty dire thing. For those who do get free, it's usually a long process, and it requires a lot of help from your spiritual team, or that's the way that I was able to do it. Some people use Jesus. There are a lot of Christians who are former Satanists. That's probably the most common path. A lot of the reason that happens is because Christians can validate these things happening. They believe in Satan. This stuff is real to them. And so a lot of survivors find help that way, and they wind up as part of a Christian community. It doesn't really speak to me personally. I respect Jesus as a teacher, but as a religion, it doesn't really speak to me. In my case, it was much more about the direct connection to my own guides, in particular my extraterrestrial guides. It was these positive ET beings who helped me through and helped me survive.
And how did you get in contact with these ET beings?
They would come to me when I was out of my body. So when you're raised in a satanic context, you spend a lot of time out of your body, dissociating. Your mind, and to some extent your soul, leaves your body. You float outside your body. You journey in the astral realms. And it's something that you kind of get used to if you dissociate easily and you have strong psychic senses. Different people have different abilities in these ways. And when you're outside the body, a lot of these spiritual entities become much more easy to perceive. So when I was outside of my body, I would see these demons that were being conjured, but I would also see behind them, sort of in the background, I would see guardian angels, I would see my positive ET team. So I could sense that they were always with me in some way.
I was curious to know how Alandra thought extraterrestrials fit into the demon-angel binary paradigm of Christian belief.
There's the influence of negative higher beings and the influence of higher positive beings. Those beings can be perceived in many ways. Extraterrestrial is one of the most common ways, and I think it's largely factual. So there could be a negative gray who can be taken for a demon on the negative side, or there can be an angel who could also be an Arcturian from that star system on the positive side. It all goes together. All of our kind of labels and mental filters, help define and decide how we perceive these things. But when you get right down to it, there are higher beings who are at play in our lives.
These higher beings may have helped Alandra spiritually, but how did he escape the satanic cult in the physical human world?
There was a period of my life when I felt it was impossible. So I struggled a lot, especially 12, 13 years old. I was in an intense battle within myself as to whether I would become one of these people or whether I would oppose them.
Alandra says he eventually started to resist the wishes of the cult and say no to them.
Usually I wasn't able to do this verbally because the mental hypnosis and programming were too strong for me to use my voice in that way. But I would say it with my actions. I would say it with slowdowns and sabotage and passive resistance over a period of years until they realized they really wouldn't be able to use me. And so what they tried to do was destroy my memory as much as possible. I went through a lot of electroshock therapy treatments. I went through a lot of chemical torture. I went through a lot of physical torture to obscure my conscious mind as much as possible, to repress the memories further. They're already repressed in this psychological system. That's how people survive and keep doing what they're expected to do within the cult. All this trauma gets buried, and a lot of you kind of goes into the subconscious realm. So basically they did their worst to try to ensure that I wouldn't have conscious memory of any of these events, and then I was let free.
If these sinister forces that Alandra describes are real, how can we recognize them?
That's a good question, because we don't have a lot of hard evidence about these things. They're very, very skillful about hiding hard evidence. And they have been for many, many generations. They have millennia of practice. If they're working on a high-profile survivor, they'll make sure they use techniques that don't leave scars, that don't leave physical evidence on the person. And it makes it very, very tricky for survivors to come out because we don't have hard evidence in most cases. Some survivors do have evidence of physical abuse, and so some of us get recognized legitimately by the legal systems as survivors of these kinds of abuses. But to point to the larger system that breeds them is really hard. because unfortunately we do have to go on trust without that hard evidence. There are enough survivors who have come out now that I think it's worth listening to them in a more serious way. I think it's my responsibility as a survivor to be public about this, because a lot of these things are hard to substantiate, but the more of us that come out, the stronger the case gets.
A lot of what Alandra says is thankfully outside the bounds of most people's life experience. Because of this, it opens the door to a lot of skepticism and dismissal of these claims. How would you try to convince people who hear what you're saying and, basically are like, oh, this guy's off his rocker, this can't be true?
It gets very tiring. What I can say is that survivors have been coming out since the 70s, at least. So, in this country anyway, and in most of the Western countries, survivors of satanic ritual abuse have been coming out in great numbers. There was a kind of groundswell in the 80s and early 90s, which is usually referred to as the Satanic Panic. So that's when a lot of survivors were coming out.
During the Satanic Panic, thousands of allegations were made and received widespread media coverage.
It's the practice of evil in the devil's name. It exists, and it's flourishing.
My next guest was used also in worshiping the devil.
So it was kind of a household topic, actually, for a long time.
The hysteria around satanic cults grew and encompassed everything from subliminal messages in heavy metal music to harmless games like Dungeons and Dragons.
And I have letter after letter where people took the pieces. Now, there's sixes involved in the pieces of the game, but they take the pieces of the game, they would throw them in the fireplace, and screams would come out because there seemed to be some kind of spiritual forces inhabiting those pieces.
It's the more dubious claims like these that helped cast doubt on the entire idea of secret satanic cults engaged in ritual abuse.
Unfortunately, because of the incredulity of the whole thing and because of the vested interests of those in power, those survivors were suppressed, those stories were suppressed, the people were discredited, they were personally attacked, some of them were assassinated.
One of the primary ways of discrediting stories of satanic ritual abuse was to call into question the authenticity of victims' memories.
A lot of it came out of the University of Washington in Seattle and from a specific organization called the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. So a lot of perpetrators who were being outed came together, they organized. Unfortunately, they organized better than the survivors did, and they created this organization called the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. They invented a psychological disorder called false memory syndrome, which is exactly what it sounds like. They were accusing survivors of making up memories or being induced to have false memories. False memory syndrome is not an actual thing. That's not a valid mental illness label. But they were able to appeal directly to the public to make them believe this was a thing for over a decade. And unfortunately, a lot of people accepted that explanation rather than believing the survivors.
The False Memory Syndrome Foundation shut down in 2019, but some of the papers and literature authored by people affiliated with the group still appear prominently in online searches and articles. Interestingly, while false memory syndrome is not a recognized mental disorder or diagnosis, dissociative amnesia is. This can more commonly be thought of as repressed memories. There is controversy surrounding the validity of recovered memories, but the research around implanting false memories in people is equally, if not more, dubious and unsubstantiated. Alandra has an understandable tendency to believe the stories of other alleged victims of satanic ritual abuse. He's actively seeking them out to help them. And how have you gone about trying to get in touch with other survivors?
I've tried everything I can. I've met a lot of other survivors through 12-step programs. I've also met a lot of us through spiritual groups of various kinds because, like myself, a lot of us, for our own sanity and survival, move into the spiritual realm and seek the guidance of higher beings, seek the guidance of different spiritual teachers. And honestly, just going public myself, people just reach out to me now and they want to share their story. They want to find other people to meet with. There are many of us who are out now and many of us who are trying to be of service. A lot of us have become certified as therapists or other kinds of healers so that we can help people with experiences like ours.
What made you decide to reach out to me to coordinate this conversation we're having?
Well, I like your other work, is the short version. And I feel I have a mission to get the word out about this as much as possible, wherever possible. I really feel it's quite a sacred thing, and it's quite important because I'm very aware, again, for every survivor that comes out, there are many that don't make it. There are many that die or go crazy. There are many that are still in the cult, including members of my own family. So this is very personal to me. I'm attempting to do what I can to save my own family. And my hope is that media like this helps them to wake up and get free. So that's a personal agenda that I have.
The world of satanic rituals, abuse, and control that Alandra described seems outlandish, and as he acknowledged, has little evidence to substantiate the claims. But cults, secret organizations, and evil do exist in the world. We just need to check recent news headlines to see the exact behavior he described is happening in organizations of all kinds. Why can't it also be happening in some yet-to-be-uncovered satanic cult? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, check out some of my other videos which cover a wide variety of subjects. If you want to keep up with what I'm working on, head over to my website and sign up for my newsletter.